So thank you very much for joining us this morning. So you've probably heard the drill, but just to do it again, so can I just get you to state your names and the capacity in which you're appearing for the Hansard record?
Melanie Fung from Eczema Support Australia. I'm the Managing Director and founder of Eczema Support Australia.
And I'm Victoria Layden. I'm a volunteer with Eczema Support Australia.
And I just need to remind you that these are formal proceedings of the Federal Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter. Your evidence today is being recorded by Hansard, and we always assume that everyone knows what Hansard is, but is being recorded by Hansard and does attract parliamentary privilege. So thank you for your written submission. Can I invite you to make an opening statement before we move on to questions?
Certainly, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me here today to represent the many members of Eczema Support Australia, a support network that I co-founded 4 years ago. I want to start by saying thank you for the work that you're doing through Allergy and Anaphylaxis Inquiry. It is tremendously important. Australians living with severe eczema are in desperate need of help. They've been suffering in silence for far too long. Today I want to give them a voice and outline some practical things that need to be done to help them. So first, the problem. Severe eczema is under-recognised, under-supported and requires significant investment by government. Severe atopic eczema is not just an itch. It is painful, relentless, debilitating, and it drives people to actively plan suicide. It is more than a skin condition. It is an inflammatory autoimmune disorder that often coexists with other allergic inflammatory diseases such as asthma, food allergies and allergic rhinitis. As a mum of twin 10-year-old boys with eczema, I know how debilitating severe eczema is, and they also have many comorbidities. Watching those you love tear their skin to pieces. And it isn't just a childhood condition. It can be lifelong and incredibly severe. With me today I have Vicky Layton, a brave and amazing lady who is volunteering with Eczema Support Australia to help build the psychosocial support for our community. I say brave and amazing because Vicky is also battling a daily health crisis with her own severe eczema. I'm sure she would be happy to answer any questions you may have to ask directly to an adult with eczema today. Imagine operating on 3 to 4 hours of broken sleep a night for years. Imagine the struggle to survive, never mind work, the broken skin, the skin infections, the pain that drives people to breaking point. This is the pain suffered by... This is the pain suffered by children and adults with eczema. And there is also an enormous impact on families and relationships. I know how little support is available. Sorry. That's what drove me to found Eczema Support Australia. However, we are entirely volunteer-based and the support required is great. Thousands of Australians are suffering right now. Thank you. Thousands of Australians are suffering right now, but their suffering is invisible. One mum told us, "My son attempted suicide when he was 18 as a result of his direct eczema." He does not believe there is any hope for him and his condition. Depression and suicide are sadly common for people with severe eczema, and is backed up by research. A major meta-analysis in the journal JAMA Dermatology revealed that people with eczema are 44% more likely to contemplate suicide and 36% more likely to attempt suicide than people without the condition. We hear repeatedly about suicidal ideation among our members and even about actual suicide within families of our members.
Pause for as long as you want, please. You're doing really well.
So, what needs to be done? In a nutshell, there needs to be more practical support and improved treatment access for people suffering with severe eczema and their carers. Whether the person with eczema is a baby, a young child, or an adult struggling with life and coping with depression. Early intervention is a must. Practical support and treatment needs to occur well before the person is driven to breaking point. The gold standard of care should be available to all, so people don't fall through the gap between dermatologists, immunologists and primary care. Financial support needs to be available so people with eczema aren't thousands of dollars out of pocket due to daily eczema management regimes. For example, moisturising isn't a choice for us, it's a medical necessity. Then there are the additional costs of other medical, topical applications and related management costs. Eczema Support Australia receives no government funding, which limits how much we can do. We need investment from the federal government for support services to ensure we are meeting the needs of members with severe eczema. I know you've already heard from Professor Connie Catalaris and other doctors about the urgent need to make new biologic medicine available in Australia. Dupixent has been publicly funded in the UK since 2018, but Australians have to pay thousands of dollars a year for it. This means, for many Australians with severe eczema, they cannot afford it. The Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee will consider Dupixent for the third time in March. 3,000 people have signed a change.org petition for this medicine to be added to the PBS. I just want to read you some of their comments. Julianne says, "As a nurse, I have seen patients suffer terrible torment with this condition. I would love to see relief provided at a reasonable cost." Emma says, "Eczema is a debilitating and torturous disease that has stopped me enjoying most of my life. Having this disease makes everyday tasks nearly impossible. Effective treatment would mean normality for me and thousands of others." Pani says, "I am an eczema sufferer and I will kill myself if I don't get relief." We recognise the federal government's commitment to making life-changing medicines available, but we are concerned that severe eczema may be overlooked amongst other budget priorities. We appeal to you that severe eczema is a condition that destroys all semblance of normal life. It makes people question whether life is worth living. Early intervention and funding for support and treatments is urgently needed. We need government to set aside some funding for new biologic therapy so it can be added to the PBS as soon as possible, as we've outlined in our pre-budget submission to the government. Before we take questions, I want to tell you about our SOS Save Us from Eczema campaign, which we've recently launched to draw attention to the severity of eczema. We chose the name SOS to draw attention to the distress and agony of eczema. The response to our campaign has been overwhelming from all ages and all corners of Australia. Our members are sending SOS postcards to their federal members of Parliament, and I just want to read 3 of them to you. Our mum says, "I'm sending an SOS because my 22-year-old son has suffered from severe eczema all his life and nearly died of sepsis. I find it incomprehensible that he has been forced to move overseas to access medicine that isn't available through PBS." I've actually met this mother's son, and it is a tragedy that we're losing him, and he has to leave his family and friends and restart his life away from his home, Australia. Another one, Brooke, who is 32 years old, wrote, "I'm sending an SOS because it's taken a huge toll on my life. I've been hospitalised with infections. I've had depression and anxiety since I was 14. I've finally found relief through Dupixent. If it isn't PBS listed, it will absolutely destroy me." I've also met with others face-to-face who are currently on Dupixent and have said very, very similar things. Caitlin, 23, states, "I'm sending an SOS because eczema is agony. I wouldn't wish eczema upon my worst enemy." To sum up, a few hours broken sleep a night, torture, depression, suicide. Australians with severe eczema need your help. We appeal to the committee to recommend that the government provide funding for practical support services for Australians with severe eczema and urgently subsidise biologic therapy that is already funded overseas. We are seeking immediate relief where this is possible through life-changing treatments as well as some longer-term support for our Australian eczema community, for the young families, the teenagers, as well as the long-suffering adults with eczema. Thank you, and we welcome questions, or if Vicky would like to add something at the moment.
Thanks for having me. So, just briefly my story. I got eczema for the first time when I was 32. I literally just woke up one day covered in this rash, and it's just... I guess so. I always had a little bit of sort of hay fever or little allergies to things that I could wash off, but absolutely not eczema, not anything that I ever needed to get medical help for. So I literally just woke up covered in this rash. I didn't know what it was. GPs really didn't know what it was and had no idea about the next 10 years of my life and what that would entail. So I think eczema has taken away a little piece of every part of my life. Things, I guess, have sort of developed along. I haven't responded to the treatments that are available in Australia. And then now also, November last year, I developed idiopathic anaphylaxis. Yeah, it's been a tough journey.
Thank you. Yeah. And thanks, Melanie, for your evidence. I know that was hard, but what strikes me about this and so many other health inquiries that it's so much of the support that's given is through parents like you and taking the initiative, not just worrying about your own kids, but worrying about other kids in the same circumstance and actually trying to make a difference for people across Australia, and you should be very proud of what you're doing in that regard. Questions? Dr. Freelander?
Yeah, look, I found your submission very moving. I think everyone here did. And I'd like to say first that your voice is being heard. Connie Catalaris has presented to this committee, and on her instigation I have written to the Minister for Health asking for dupilumab to be made available for people with severe eczema, funded through the PBS, because it is clearly life-changing for people with severe eczema. We run a severe eczema clinic at my hospital that Connie is head of, and we have a trial at the moment that is incredibly effective, and it is life-changing. And I thank you both for your submissions, and I found it very moving, and I've certainly seen some of my patients have really incredibly distressing time with severe eczema, and I think what you say is right. People, because they have severe eczema, tend to cover themselves. They're not immediately obvious to someone walking down the street, but I've seen what it can do to kids from babies through to adolescence to adult life, and I think that we need to make people aware of how severe eczema can be and how life-affecting it can be and what it can also do to the families. And there are better treatments available. So we need to really put the pressure on now to ramp up availability of these newer medications. But I did just want to ask you very briefly about the financial costs involved, and having twins is bad enough, I know, in terms of cost and time, but having twins with severe eczema must have been extremely financially difficult as well as time consuming. Can you give us an idea of the costs involved?
Extremely. It's very difficult to put a monetary figure on it. My twins, I titled my submission as "It Started with Eczema," and that was a bit of a personal submission really as well, because my boys presented with the skin barrier defect really from birth, and we have asthma, hay fever in our family, but I have no food allergies.
I didn't mean to be horrible about twins, but my son's got twins, and we're always glad to see them, but we're also very glad when they go home.
One thing I'm thankful for, both of my boys having the severe eczema and the multiple food allergies and the asthma, they do get each other. So they've got their own little support network together from birth, which is wonderful. But to put a figure on it is difficult because if I just make a note here, for us, it's meant a big list of things not to do, things to do. Big, huge pharmaceutical bills. Our chemist must love us, our local chemist. Constant applications of creams and ointments and bleach baths and wound dressings and specialist appointments. They all add up, but they also had to be withdrawn very quickly from mainstream school environment because of their comorbidities. The school environment wasn't compatible, and our specialist told us to get them out and homeschool them. So we've been homeschooling for 5 years. But prior to that, I had to give up my career, my job as HR manager, even before we started school, because they got so severe they needed 24/7 in-home assistance. I'm very lucky I have a registered nurse living at home. That is my mum. So we've been able to manage things well with a lot of communication with specialists. I have multiple specialists, dermatologists, paediatric allergists, the GP, paediatrician. The costs involved, you can't put a figure on. Financially are huge. They are completely life-changing huge. But they're very difficult to add up.
Yeah, good. And for you, Victoria, have there been big costs involved?
Big cost. I think my costs are probably a bit easier to quantify. I can say definitely the first 3 years of diagnosis was like a $50,000 input. In the time I was diagnosed, I was living in a regional area, so I didn't have access to doctors. So you do fall into the trap of trying everything, every promise, and as foolish as I feel now, you are so desperate to keep yourself alive, keep yourself going through the day. So a lot of financial debt. I had to sell my house to pay for the electricity bills, the pharmacy bills, the creams, all of these sorts of things, and that, along with having to step down from my career. I was a registered nurse and in an acute setting, and I just physically could not do that anymore. So financially, I sort of, my costs went up, my income went down, and it's a big loss. So there's definitely a $50,000 I can say, but it could be $100,000. I don't want to say, but enough to change your life and change the course of your life for years to come.
And they're just some of the direct costs.
The financial cost,
And I think the support out there for people dealing with eczema and the comorbidities that often go with that is lacking. And as a support organisation, we're not there to provide medical guidance. We point to the evidence-based medical authorities on that, but we're there to help reduce that isolation and provide access to things like psychology services. We actually pay for psychology services for our members where we can, and general information, school kits, which is ironic since my children aren't in the school system, but support group meetings. So there's those other areas of support which really needs to be boosted, as well as the treatment options. I mean, ideally, if we've got better treatment options, we can reduce the need for support because we're not going to be having as many issues. But until people get things under control, it's going to be an uphill battle. And unless you live with it or you're very close to it as a medical professional, the problem is severe eczema is not recognised as a need.
Thank you both for coming along and for your very powerful submission. Thank you.
Dr. Martin.
Thank you very much for coming along today, and thank you also for sharing the information about the mental health impact that people with eczema experience. And it is very high, the research that you quoted, 44% which I wasn't aware of. But I'm just wondering about, obviously a lot of people reach out for help through your organisation, Eczema Support Australia. I'm just wondering if you have a way of communicating to people who might be members or who are contacting you for the first time who are experiencing mental health problems. Do you have a mechanism by which you can communicate to them where to get help? For example, do you have on all your communication contact details for Lifeline and for mental health services across the country?
Yes, that's something we're wanting to build. At the moment, we've developed a partnership with clinical psychologists in Brisbane who are providing our members with consultations either via Skype or telephone. One of the things we want to do is to be able to induct, educate other mental health practitioners and allied health practitioners about the impact of allergies and eczema. We've done it with one group. We've only been going 4 years. We've only renamed to Eczema Support Australia last May. Before that we were Hands to Hold, Allergies and Eczema Support. So yes, we are, and we're providing lifeline contacts on certain posts that we put out, but there is a lot more that we'd like to do in that area. It was probably our number one first priority, first project, support groups and then psychology consultations to get people to reach out for that support and to break down the barriers so we don't require a GP referral initially, and we pay for the consultations to make sure that people know that A, they deserve the support, B, they need the support and it's available.
I would recommend that given the high incidence of mental health issues for people with eczema, that the information be on all your correspondence so that there is access to help, because Lifeline and Headspace and other organisations.
And we want to develop more partnerships and connections there. We're going through a big learning curve ourselves. I've never run a charity before. There's been a lot of big changes over the last 12 months even in our charity, so positive changes and focus. So certainly any advice and guidance from the committee and elsewhere would be much appreciated.
Of course, we'll take away that number as well, that 44%, because that is very high.
That's quite a recent research that's come through.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. And Melanie, thank you very much for coming along today and for sharing your two individual stories. I think, like so many of the other people that this committee listens to, we don't always have an appreciation of just how serious issues are until we actually hear firsthand from people like yourself. So thank you for that. And thank you for arranging to come to Parliament House on Thursday week, where perhaps some more of our colleagues will be able to attend and also hear some of the statistics and the issues that you're confronted with. I guess I really only have a couple of questions, and one is to do with the TGA process and the fact that there are medications overseas that are being used that have some degree of success, and why they're not being used here. Do you know whether any of the manufacturers of those medicines or creams have actually applied for PBS listing?
Yes, well there's the injectable biologic dupilumab, which has TGA approval, I understand, for adolescents and adults. And for the adults, I believe it's going for the third round of review by the Pharmaceutical Benefits
Pharmaceutical Benefits
Advisory Committee
yeah.
Next month.
Yeah.
As far as other ones overseas, I know we're calling it the era of eczema. There are new treatments that are coming through the system, but I believe the only one TGA approved in Australia is Dupicent, and that's the one we've got a lot of our members actually who have been on the trial and compassionate access to that. So that's the one that we're most aware of.
Can they access that right now?
Yes, you can access it on private script for about $1,600 a month. And there are a number of people who were on the trial and do have compassionate access to it, I believe, through the system, through the pharmaceutical company.
Just to interrupt, have you been able to use it with your boys?
Not yet. They're 10, so they have not been able to access it as yet. But given their comorbidities and given their skin condition, they're well controlled at the moment, but it would take 2 days for them to get out of control again. So I do imagine that by the time they're teenagers, young adults, that we will, and out of the bubble environment that they're in now with homeschooling, they will probably need something like that.
It's only approved from 12 upwards.
Yeah. And in your presentation today, you referred to people becoming suicidal. Are you aware of anyone who has actually lost their life as a result of it?
Yeah, I can speak. My father also had eczema later in life. He lived in a rural area, didn't have access to treatment. And the day he went to the doctor and was told there was no further treatment is the day we lost him to suicide. And so although I don't certainly blame his doctors and things for what happened, they didn't know any better. And that's a big loss. Yeah.
Lack of hope. Despair, lack of hope.
And I guess that lack of, recognition and understanding, even with health professionals, when you go and you say you're suffering, people don't get it. We don't see adults have that intensity of the disease and the relentlessness, and when that builds over years and years of not being treated, it's not recognised, so you don't get that emotional support as well. And I know with my dad, after he died, we knew that he actually had exposed bone where he'd scratched through, but that wasn't looked at when he went to the doctor, just because they didn't know that it could be that bad. And so this was somebody who suffered for many, many years without access to treatment, no awareness in the community, and it was a loss that could have been avoided. Yeah.
And just lastly, is it just food and perhaps other chemical products that make contact with the person that trigger the eczema, or is it even just emotional conditions?
It's a very, very complex condition. I think Professor Smith said earlier that of his patients, 90% have eczema. I know with eczema, many don't have food allergies. Many do, many don't. And this is where the communication, I think, between dermatologists and immunologists, the patient, the parent, gets stuck in the middle. But the triggers for eczema are varied and many, which makes it even harder to control, which is why something like a biologic, it doesn't matter what the trigger is, it turns off those receptors. So the triggers could be heat, stress, cold, food, grasses, dust mites, pets. But I know with a lot of the adults we've spoken with, and particularly through this SOS campaign, a lot of the stories come through, it tends to get turned on a lot in adulthood with stress. It could be one incident in life that just switches that flick. With children, it is so varied and so complex, which is why we need better treatment options, because a topical treatment's just going to fix part of it. Well, not even fix part of it, and it's not always a long-term solution for many people. And avoidance is sometimes impossible, and sometimes we can't avoid stress in life either. So,
Thank you very much.
Isabel.
I have one final question. I'm sorry if you lost Victoria of your father. It's always difficult when you lose a loved one. My question was around dupilumab and have you actually seen the direct difference that this drug makes in people's lives?
yes,
With someone with eczema, how does the drug work to a layman? And just for the sake of Hansard, and what's the difference in quality of life of someone who is able to access it at that $600 a month? $1,600. Say that again. $1,600 a month, and someone who's not able to access it.
We can only talk from anecdotal and from experience we've had with members and what they've told us and what we've seen with our members. I know the first person I met who was on dupilumab was almost bouncing off the walls of joy and wanting to shout from the rooftops. For him personally, he couldn't access a trial because he had so many other comorbidities and health issues that he couldn't go through the washout phase, but he did access it through compassionate access later on, and he said within 2 weeks he was a different person. All his life, he's in his mid to late 40s, all his life he has suffered terribly, and now he has to remember to try and put moisturiser on, for example, because he forgets he still has the dry skin, but he doesn't have the symptoms at all, and that for him occurred within the first 2 weeks of commencing on dupilumab.
Is that a tablet form? Or
Injectable.
injectable, subcutaneous injection?
Yes.
I think it's an intramuscular.
Intramuscular, yeah.
Every 2 weeks?
And then another member that we've met, he said he didn't realise, and he was the same in that he was on the trial, I think, but he had that rapid change, and he didn't realise what having a life actually meant until he was...
Did the symptoms completely disappear, or is it just held at bay to a percentage?
I think it varies with people, and from the statistics I've seen and read, it can vary somewhat, but and over a period of time. But for the ones that I've met and spoken with, the symptoms have 90 to 100% gone. And I think you've spoken with some similar people
as well. It's generally the debilitating aspect of the disease is taken away. I think one of the people used a tiny bit of steroids once in a 6-month period, so certainly it reduces it, where you're not disabled by this disease or limited by any means, yeah.
And I know as well we've heard from some members of comorbidities like their asthma and hay fever has also improved.
It's said to be very good for hay fever.
Does anyone know if there are any long-term side effects from taking that drug for a long period of time? Or
I'm guessing Dr. Freelander would be able to
he may be able to
that.
answer that.
It seems to be extremely safe, and as far as we're aware, some people get a bit of gastrointestinal upset, I believe, and a bit of nausea, but the vast majority of people get very few side effects. And you have to remember that the treatments that they're on, like topical steroids, sometimes chemotherapy type drugs, methotrexate, cyclosporins, cause major side effects. This is a dramatic new treatment because it doesn't cause the side effects that current treatments cause. And my understanding, and Connie Catalaris is the best one to us, but at least 80% of people get a dramatic response.
That was my question.
Yeah.
I know one of our members, he was on cyclosporin, methotrexate, the works. He had to stop because he was having organ failure, liver problems. His only side effect that he's had is conjunctivitis, dry eye, which they're managing better earlier to try and minimise that common side effect. But everyone we've spoken to that's had that side effect has just said, we'd rather live with this dry eye symptom every day of the week than go back to what we were like before.
So the long and short of it is, a TGA approved, PBAC is considering it in March, is your understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
I did write to Greg Hunt about it.
Can I just check, when you're down in Canberra, are you seeing Greg Hunt while you're there?
I would love to. I believe he has another meeting on.
Just down for 1 day.
At that time, I would love to meet with Greg Hunt. I'm hoping that Sam Devlin will be coming to our event, and we'd welcome anyone else to come along because we're going to have a number of patients there, College of Dermatology. We're having the Australian Dermatology Nurses Association represented there as well. So there will be a good all-round network of people to talk to. Allergy and Anaphylaxis, through the National Allergy Strategy as well. They will be there at some point. So we would love to be able to have as many people come along to that, and yes, we would love to have, I have requested a meeting with Greg Hunt. I know that he's extremely busy, but we, as I said, this submission is really about making eczema seen and heard, and we feel that it is often the lowest on the priority pile, and we really want to express that we need a voice there as well. So
Okay, well, I'll undertake to try and help arrange that meeting.
I do have some hard copies of some invitations I'm happy to leave with you. Should you like to spread them around? I know that I think you've all received some, so thank you.
So can I thank you again for being here today, and more importantly, thank you for everything that you're doing more broadly, and we hope to see you in Canberra. Well, we will see you in Canberra, and hopefully there's some good news in March as well from PBAC. So, so thank you for your time today, and we'll send you a transcript of proceedings, and if there are any corrections or additions, if you can come back to the committee secretariat by the 29th. But you've both been very powerful advocates, so thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
And we now call Professor Davies. Hello. It's going to be a hard act to follow, I'm afraid.
I'm glad to hear. It's an important issue.
Yeah, it is.